Okay, hopefully I am alive. Welcome everybody. If you're joining in on the live stream here at any stage, I'm going to try something a little different for Christmas. A little politics roundup of where we are at in the country as we head into 2026, but also some reflective reading of a chapter that might be related to what we all might need going into 2026. For those who don't know, I'm Gerry O'Neill and I write the West Awake Substack. And a lot of my political writing in the last 3 months has been focused on noticeable shifts that I've seen in the Irish political arena. One noticeable change of direction is the developing relationship, counter-narrative relationship between the Garda Commissioner, the new one, Jim Kelly, and the Minister for Justice, Jim O'Callaghan. They have been started to consistently message in a different way about the mass immigration project in Ireland. And from an observational point of view, I'm interested to see if these words are just phrases there, well, particularly Jim Callaghan, phrases that he's blathering are out, and whether he's going to actually walk the walk. Yesterday, there was headlines across social media and the newspapers quoting Jim O'Callaghan saying that the increase in the Irish population was affecting social cohesion. This is an interesting change of language because, in a sense, it's starting to directly contradict Micheál Martin and his kind of consistent messaging on a rejection of a narrow type of nationalism, our old-fashioned type of nationalism, that he and his government have been following for the last 3 or 4 years pretty directly. So what this indicates to me, more than anything else, is that we have an economic problem coming in quick and fast in 2026. And first and foremost, that probably means the top of immigration coming in at the numbers it has been coming in at, they have been coming in at over the last 3 years, needs to slow down firstly. Now, as to whether this is a directional change of approach, will be revealed quite quickly. And a signal to that, I believe, is if the Minister for Justice has the balls to take out Micheál Martin over the Christmas or early New Year. So in a sense, we haven't had a political donkey fight for a leadership position for I can't remember when. So this will tell us if the government if elements of the Fianna Fáil party are actually moving in a direction closer to the one that I and many of you watching would like to see. I remain skeptical, but I think it is important that we note these changes of language by our government. Now, I personally, in my writing, have avoided getting into depth about two conflicts: the Israeli-Palestine war and the Russia-Ukraine war, other than to comment on them through the lens of Irish policy being enacted here, whether that's being driven through the European Union or coming out of the chicken brains of our political class. So they're just two things. Now, I bring them up is because our foreign policy has been an absolute disaster over the last 3 years. It has not been a policy that has protected the nation of Ireland, I would say. And as a result, the recent Bondi Beach killings, or otherwise, have shown how our government talk out of both sides of their arse. On the one hand, government policy has been to attack Israel pretty strongly and directly, to the point that they've removed embassy services. And on the other hand, we have statements coming out of a variety of ministers, commiserating with the tragedy of Bondi Beach and noting the rise of anti-Semitism in Ireland. Now, if the latter is the case, that anti-Semitism has been driven by our government's behavior towards Israel. Now, I have stated before, the Irish government at all times is not acting in the best interest of the country, and is increasingly verbalizing a bellicose war stance in their language, and involving themselves in the affairs of nuclear nations, as if we ourselves are some huge military force. They haven't protected our traditional neutrality, and they've scorned our type of traditional diplomacy, and has wrecked the reputation of our nation as a country that sends neutral, well-respected peacekeeping troops. So, in a sense, our peacekeeping troops, wherever they're deployed, especially if it's in the Middle East, are now in more danger because of the behavior of our government. So that is one point to note going into 2026, that as the economic headwinds are changing rapidly, and the uncertainty in the world with regards to expansion of war rhetoric, which is likely to increase and is likely to attempt to drag Ireland into particular directions, whether it's into NATO or whether it's commitments to European army and funding it, and increase funding that way. The pressure will be on in 2026 in a way that it is there. It might be apparent at the moment, but I think it's becoming really apparent. Another good example of crazy Irish diplomacy is the continued invitations issued to President Zelensky of the Ukraine. This is not the behavior of a neutral country. And while much of the media commentary on Zelensky's visit and the aftermath has focused on, these Russian drones apparently spotted in Irish waters, and the need to fund our Irish army to shoot them down, or this kind of talk has no benefit to the Irish nation. And I would say further, the real question is, and the real problem is, the decision to invite President Zelensky to Ireland has created these problems. And this is coming directly from a series of our government's leadership in the forms of press release statements and European and global organizations that they are accepting invitations from and speaking on um, all the time. So this talk is going to have consequences in 2026 is the way I'm framing all of this. Whether I'm primarily concerned in my writing on the West Awake with the protection of the Irish nation and the best interests of the Irish nation. And sometimes that means that you have to do things that on a personal level you might not want to do, but which is in the best interests of the nation. We have, unfortunately, a dopamine addicted political and media class in Ireland. And they seem to respond more to digital digital traction, digital cheerleading, and pats on the back from a series of unelected global people and organizations. We'll leave that rabbit hole to another day. One thing to note, and I say note, is an observation. When you hear a public official primarily focus on the need to fix Ireland's housing problem, they are not in the business of fixing the Irish nation. That is not to say we don't have an Irish housing problem, but what it means is they're in the business of fixing a problem that is hindering the expansion of the global economy in Ireland. So when people are afraid to address the four unspeakables in any fashion, COVID, mass immigration, COVID, excess deaths, the pandemic era, the mass immigration project, climate, and the trans ideologies. That's when we know that the person speaking is acting in the interests of expanding the Irish global economy and not acting in the interests of the Irish nation. Now, one of the hopeful points of the last 6 months, I believe, is a sense I get that many people are starting to wake up to the concept of nation. This is a good thing. It's also a reason why I think Justice Minister O'Callaghan and the new Garda Commissioner Kelly have started to behave in the manner that they're starting to at least talk in. It's a response and an admission to all of many people watching that what the things we have been saying in the last 3 years have not only been correct, have been proven to be correct. And the language now being used is a reflection of that. So I think we should look for confirming evidence that the way that I think or you think is correct, so that when it's wrong, we can in some way self-correct and look at problems in a different way. So that's why you won't hear too many people in the alternative media talking about what's going on with O'Callaghan and Kelly. It's definitely a shift. Now the question is this more smoke and mirrors, or is there some reality behind what they're doing? They seem to be working in tandem. And there seems to be a slight change in direction. Now, notwithstanding the seeming weird creation of a far-right group that was targeted by Gardaí, arrests made, and publicised highly. Now, as somebody in this space for 4 years, and many of you too, I've never heard of the two individuals arrested. and I've never heard of the organization that they're allegedly members of. I think it's highly unlikely that that would be the case if this was an authentic movement. I think that's an indicator of, now that's a possible indicator of a number of things, some of them nefarious, but there is one element to that particular episode that could be positive, and one which I won't go into now, but one I will probably write about over the Christmas, because I am fascinated to see if Jim O'Callaghan and Fianna Fáil backbenchers are going to chop the balls of Micheál Martin or let him sail off into the sunset on his own terms. If the latter is the case, they are in a sense just bullshitting us. If the former is the case, again, I'd be monitoring that as a good thing, but we'll have to wait and see. Now, I stated one of the things I haven't fully realized is a lot of people that watch my videos don't follow me on Substack, so they'll know that I am not at all have faith in any of the political parties, and I am pretty non-violently anti-authoritarian, or anti-establishment, anti-authoritarian as well, probably. But I'm looking at this really as from an observer's point of view. I don't have any emotion about whether I'm right or wrong about what might be coming next. So while that might have some drawbacks, it also gives me the advantage of actually speaking what I think, for people that have for people that do have an interest in the outcomes of the country. Now, there are the two kind of main things I would note moving forward into 2026. I think what we're going to find is that a lot of the country quietly agree with some of the things I've been talking about. John Waters and a variety of other people in the Irish alternative scene have been talking about for 3 or 4 years. I think we might be quite surprised at the reaction of some of the general public next year in terms of their moves towards a position that might be closer to the ones that many have been screaming and roaring about for since March 2020. But I suppose one of the things I wanted to move into is, as we're hitting the Christmas period, to wish everybody here that supported the channel and supported me and on the West Awake a very Merry Christmas. But also, I was on the Richie Allen show yesterday, and we were chatting about my book UNVAXXED Soul, which I know I have been carpet bombing my readers with for about a month, so apologies for that, but it'll be ending after today. But one of the questions his audience texted in while I was on was this idea about the inward journey that is the central thesis of my book, is an inward look rather than the things I've been talking about for the first 20 minutes of this video. And the question he asked me, which I think is relevant for everybody that recognizes an outer world that is unrecognizable and dark, and one they'd like to change. But sometimes in the eagerness to change it, we have to stop for a second to find out if we are in a state to meet that darkness. And I suppose the question from that person was to do with something I had said earlier in the interview, which was, working on our internal Traumas are internal shadows so that we can meet the temptations of the world around us. This is especially true, I think, for in the digital identities our governments are forcing us into using. And his question was, should he how should he fix himself, or should he just accept himself the way he is, and kind of move on? Now, I have no idea what the correct answer to that is, but it got me to think for him. But it got me thinking to a point about myself, and a very short chapter I'd written in UNVAXXED SOUL, which I'm going to read as a final reflection for the for you all today. And it has to do with this aspect of how do I make myself stronger, less susceptible to temptation, weakness, addressing trauma. And I'm going to leave this video with this reading, and also just a final happy Christmas to everybody that's supported, watched, tolerated this the Scholar Gypsies in 2025. The chapter is called The Well. The woman said she felt guilt, and that a holy well held her in a well water's embrace. Tiny wet eruptions of emotion quivered on her tongue and tingled the back of her throat as she spoke. Old jolts of memory, new tears trembled on her lashes. The holy well held me, she said, and I believed her. On the drive home from east to west, I eased my foot off the accelerator and dipped a toe into the waters, into dark pools and wells of grief. Miles and miles of impressionist countryside jogged by the windscreen. I knew a well, and I wondered if she might hold me for a moment or two. On my last visit, I had never thought to ask. I rolled Bridget to a slow stop on the grassy bank and slid down my window. I glanced across the road to the field and to the holy well. It was cold and blustery and darkish grey in the heavens. The old St. Bridget's well was protected by a circle of trees. I opened the rusty gate and, mercifully, the place was empty. I bent down on the last step, cupped some water in my hands, and wet my lips. The water tasted a little indifferent. Under some bushes, folding chairs were stacked away. I plucked one out, flipped it open like an umbrella, and sat. I opened my book at a random place and read the poem I landed on. The wind whistled and whispered through the branches, as it always seems to do here. I could feel my racing thoughts starting to jog, then slow to a quiet shuffle. I lit a rolled up smoke and considered it for a moment before inhaling a drag of its devilment. I could smoke here all night, I thought. Beyond the well waters were 5 trees, 4 green-leafed and one in the middle, a purple sycamore with leaves of a deep purple hue, a stain in the sea of green. The branches of all 5 swayed back and forth together as the tempo of the wind rose a little. The deep purples flowed and flamingoed with the greens, an intimate, knowing dance. They seemed comfortable in each other's movement, even as the wind swirled around them. I inhaled, exhaled, and understood the picture in front of me, for it was my picture. Deep bruised shadows of grief, secrets, hurts, and pains. The purple sycamore wasn't so big, and wasn't so small either, I noticed. It looked a beautifully natural and unique part of this 5-tree forest. It struck me that the greens would be lost without the deep purples. I sat mesmerized, puffing away, stilled by the sound of trees and breeze against the calmness of the well waters. I started to speak whatever words came into my head and let them gush out through my lips. They flowed easily and pleased my ears. I looked again at the 5 trees and something drip-dropped into my mind. I wouldn't exchange my purple for a 5th green tree, I thought. Soon I finished my smoke and rose from my folding chair. I emptied my pockets of the tobacco pouch I'd carried to the well, placed it in the center of the seat, and moved the chair under the protective branch of a tree. I tossed the lighter and the packet of cigarette papers onto the seat too and left. You'd never know who might show up some dark night in need of a quiet smoke of his contemplation. I sat back into the car, content, turned the engine, and looked back across the field to the well that held me just long enough.